In this short segment, we're going to be talking about a new health paradigm or a new health equation. There is a predictable and reliable framework that we all can use to allow us maximum results in the treatment and the amelioration of disease. And so over the course of this segment, we're going to be talking about a new theoretical model. The true cause of most diseases, in the most simplistic sense, is truly the dance of nature and nurture. Classically, nature has been seen as the inheritable factors that we store in our DNA or our book of life. And nurture represents the environment that DNA or those genetic blueprint bathes in, such as our diet and lifestyle. We're going to use a simple analogy, and we're going to think of nature and nurture as the causes or the match, which then ultimately leads to certain mediators. So the mediators in this analogy would be referred to as the fire, and these are detectable in or objectified, like say, for an example, in the blood work as in dysfunctions in the lipid panel with cholesterol or inflammatory markers such as C-reactive protein. And then the mediators will lead to certain signs and symptoms and diagnoses, which in this continued analogy can be thought of as the smoke. So to quickly summarize, the match is the cause. And this again is the interplay between nature and nurture, which will ultimately lead to the fire. And these are the mediators that we can detect, for example, in the blood work. And then on the outward appearance, we can see the smoke, which are the signs and symptoms like fatigue and headache, or ultimately diagnoses. And if you think about allopathic or conventional medicine, really the main focus is on the smoke and the fire. So we're going to look at some of these aspects a little bit closer, so that way we can pull everything together at the end to allow you to use this model for your own healthcare. So again, nature can be thought of as the DNA or the inheritable traits that we get from conception. Nature, of course, refers to all of the genes, all of the chromosomes that we've inherited from mom and dad, and we can think of it as a great big book of life. And it used to be thought that in that book of life there were certain chapters, like a chapter for autoimmunity or a chapter for cancer, and if they were bathed in the right environment, they would get turned on. But we now know this to be completely wrong. In essence, after the completion of the Human Genome Project in 2000, they were expecting to find the one gene, one disease model. And what they discovered was that we didn't have many more genes than, say, an earthworm. And so what was actually happening was that the genes are actually being played similar to like a piano. And it's not one gene, one disease, but it's like a melody. And we have to find the right keys, and there's multiple keys being played at the same time. And as we'll see in a moment, we'll see the other areas that influence this that are beyond the physical realm. Nurture can really be thought of as something they refer to as the episome, which is the sum total of all the non-genetic environmental factors. And classically, I think they've made two mistakes. The first one is that they've limited it to physical factors that can influence the organism. And the second is they really silo it into the period of time during conception. So in this new model, we're going to include pre-conception, peri-conception, or the time around conception, conception itself, the time the fetus is in utero, and then of course post-utero. So we're looking at the past as well as the present. So this is the ontogeny, or the development of an organism within the entire lifetime. And this will include both physical and energetic components, as we will soon see. We're now going to look a little deeper into the nurture aspect, and there's three components that we're going to talk about. The first of them is called epigenetics, and epigenetics means above, upon, or over, and it really refers to the physical factors interplaying with the physical factors of the body. So you can think of it in that piano analogy as the piano player. So, for example, if the nutritional status of a pregnant mom is lacking a certain key nutrient for fetal development, then through the hands of epigenetics, the piano player, certain genes will be turned on or off like a light switch, without actually affecting the physical component of the actual book. Epigenetics really is affecting how that book is read. The epigenetic physical factors primarily are concerned with our diet and lifestyle, but they do include other things that can affect the genome or how the piano is being played, and that includes, of course, physical factors such as whether or not we had a certain type of surgery or the different medications that we're taking, whether or not a child was born natural childbirth or C-section, the food, of course, that we're eating, the water that we're drinking, whether or not we are receiving adequate sunshine, whether or not we are breathing in the right air, exercising, certain types of injuries, the way we are sleeping, and then, of course, there's a long list of different types of toxins like biotoxins. These are toxins that are alive, like viruses and bacteria, man-made toxins, naturally occurring toxins, exogenous toxins, and these are toxins from the outside world in, and then there's, of course, endogenous toxins as well. This can be produced by cellular respiration, free radicals, or even some of the waste products that some of the bacteria are producing in our gut. Classically, epigenetics has been kind of pigeonholed into the physical factors, but I think there's enough consensus today to understand that there are quote-unquote non-physical factors interplaying on how certain genes are being expressed. For example, how we go through different life transitions, whether it's a death of a loved one or a relationship problem, the amount of love that's given to a child, or the amount of love and companionship that's given to the elderly population. So there are obviously other factors that can be playing into this, but I still think most of the medical community looks at these factors as being translated into the body still as a physical factor, meaning that if the stress is elevated, then the mechanism is going to be increasing cortisol production as the sole mechanism for these epigenetic changes. So in addition to epigenetics, we really need to include in our framework the energetic and the spiritual components that are affecting the human body. And so these are the things that are beyond the physical. So we propose a term called metagenetics, and meta simply just means beyond. So these are the non-physical factors that interplay with non-physical factors of the human body. So one that a lot of people would understand would be the collective conscious or unconscious modes of psychological transmission, such as the archetypal patterns of inheritance as proposed by Carl Jung. This would also include memes. So a gene is a unit of inheritance that's physical. A meme is a cultural unit of inheritance. And we find this within our family structures. We find this within our culture, within our nations and different states and so forth. For example, a meme in the United States would be that we eat a cow, and a meme in India would be that they revere the cow. Now, if you think about this, right, cultural indoctrination, if you go looking for it inside the human body, we've never found a trace. We never found a memory trace or a physical trace, but yet we know it exists, right? So cultural indoctrination is affecting our body in different ways than just on the physical side. This also includes morphogenetic fields as proposed by biologist Rupert Sheldrake, and this simply is the idea that our body's acting like a radio receiver, and it's downloading information from different fields, and whether that be light or sound energy and so forth. This also includes miasms, which is an old homeopathic term for different units of energetic or non-physical inheritance that are actually transmitted from by family to family. And so The other part of metagenetics that we're going to refer to is the fact that it's also working on non-physical factors of the human body. And so we now know that the DNA acts more like a harp. There's a acoustic and there's a electrical and there's a light that's being emitted all the time from the human body, and that there is actually an interplay from different fields of energy that are interplaying within the body and not necessarily stored in something concretized that we can actually measure at this moment in history. So lastly, transgenetic, or trans, meaning transcending, are the spiritual factors that interplay with the non-physical aspects of the human body. So spiritual patterns of karma, patterns of death and rebirth, inherited through cycles of what they refer to as samsara or nirvana, as discussed by the world's perennial wisdom traditions. And so whether or not we have objectable proof, we do just need to include this within the framework. So we've talked about the cause, nature and nurture, or in our analogy, the match. And now we're going to be looking at the other side of the equation, and this is what the causes actually produce. So this is the fire. These are cellular imbalances, such as the primary ones of sugar imbalances, oxygen utilization, oxidative stress or free radical production, and inflammatory concerns, as well as how it affects different body systems. So all different body systems can be affected, but the three primary areas to really focus on initially is the communication pathways, so the nervous system, the hormonal system, the gastrointestinal system, because that's what houses like 70% of our body's immune system. And in fact, if we have problems in the gastrointestinal tract, everything is downstream from digestion and absorption, so everything will suffer. And then lastly, our body's ability to detox, our liver, our kidney, our lymphatic systems as well. And lastly, we have the smoke. So these are the signs and symptoms and the diagnoses. These are the outward appearance. So this is the fatigue and the weight gain and the sleep disturbances and the diagnosis of depression, anxiety, and autoimmunity and the like. Okay, so now we come to the end and we want to put all this together. So go ahead and download one of the PDF forms that we have available that help you to take your entire health history and to create a story. And it's using the framework or the ideas that have been previously discussed. So once you fill in all the information, there's a couple questions that you're going to want to ask yourself. And the first is you want to distinguish between the controllable and then the uncontrollable factors. And for obvious reasons, you want to surrender the uncontrollable factors and you want to begin working on the controllable. So within the controllable, the second thing that is needing to be done, and that is to distinguish between primary and secondary concerns. And obviously, you want to work on primary concerns first and secondary concerns second. I can't tell you how important this is, because it doesn't matter what disease you have, whether it's cancer or autoimmunity or diabetes. Some people are jumping into, holistic pharmacy by throwing all sorts of different supplements on them without working on the foundation of diet, lifestyle, exercise, right thinking, so forth. So, and another example would be when you come to the area labeled fire, which is really those objective and measurable areas, you really want to start with the primary cellular imbalances and the primary body systems that we talked about, such as the sugar imbalances, oxygen utilization, or the body systems like the gastrointestinal communication and the detox systems. And if, as you go through this, whether you go through this by yourself or with a practitioner, there are, of course, secondary concerns. So, like, as an example, there would be nutrient deficiencies or food sensitivities. Well, in essence, those are secondary concerns because the most important thing first is working on the gastrointestinal tract ability to absorb nutrients. And in essence, by doing that, you begin to take care of the nutrition deficiencies and the food sensitivities by working on the primary concerns first. Thanks so much for listening, and we look forward to more lectures.